The Federation of Aligned Worlds had opinions about humanity, and precisely none of them involved the word subtle. For 8 standard cycles, since Earth's noisy introduction to the galactic stage, which involved, unfortunately, a misfire of primitive nuclear propulsion that accidentally vaporized an unmanned Bentheri trade probe, the broader community had settled into comfortable certainty about what humans were: loud, aggressive, prone to solving complex diplomatic situations by either punching things or exploding things, sometimes both simultaneously. They played music at volumes that violated several species' definitions of sonic weaponry. They laughed in council chambers. They ate foods that required warning labels in 6 languages. What they absolutely categorically were not good at was stealth. This was common knowledge, the kind of fact you didn't question, like Zen theory malt in spring or never accept a Grellian's third drink off. The Drevathi Empire had made particularly sure everyone understood this fact. The Drevathi, for context, were very invested in being known as the galaxy's apex predators of silence. 7-foot-tall reptilian philosophers who'd turned sneaking around into both an art form and a religious practice. Their ships could bend light, muffle gravitational signatures, and allegedly make dark matter look away in embarrassment. They'd won the Deep Void Navigation Tournament, the galaxy's premier competition for stealth operations, 14 times in the last 20 cycles. Yelthrax, the Unperceived, current Drevathi champion and owner of 3 consecutive tournament victories, had scales that shifted through colors most species couldn't even see. He possessed 17 advanced degrees in strategic invisibility and had once hidden inside a star for 3 days, just to prove a point. When journalists asked him about the upcoming tournament, he'd flickered his throat sack in what translators rendered as dismissive amusement. His words dripped with an aloofness that took decades to cultivate. I have observed their military exercises. They announce their presence before entering systems. They illuminate their ships with external lights for no tactical purpose. They even broadcast entertainment signals that can be detected across multiple sectors. Asking if I fear human competition is like asking if I fear being ambushed by a supernova. The interview had gotten substantial play across Federation networks, mostly because Yelthrax had a flair for memorable condescension, which made the registration roster for this cycle's tournament notably interesting when it appeared. Commander Anya Petrov, United Earth Naval Intelligence, had signed up. The announcement caused what could diplomatically be termed a stir, and what the Bentheri gossip networks termed absolutely hilarious chaos. Federation officials triple-checked the registration. Earth's diplomatic corps issued a statement that essentially boiled down to "Yes, we're serious, please stop asking." The Drevathi embassy released a counter-statement that once you removed the flowery language about honor and tradition, basically said we'll try not to laugh too hard. Betting pools opened immediately. The Grellians, who'd gamble on continental drift if you gave them odds, installed humanity as 84-7-1 underdogs. Most bets on Earth's performance weren't about winning. They were about how quickly Commander Anya would be eliminated. The over-under sat at 4 hours into the preliminary round. Anya herself declined all interview requests. Her official military photograph showed a woman in her mid-30s with dark hair pulled into a regulation bun, gray eyes that didn't match her slight smile, and absolutely no readable expression beyond professional courtesy. Earth's media tried to spin this into mysterious warrior mystique. The galactic press mostly interpreted it as humans not understanding they were about to be embarrassed. The tournament took place in the Obsidian Reaches, a sector of space where 3 nebulas intersected with an unusually dense asteroid field and enough background radiation to make standard sensors effectively useless. Perfect conditions for seeing who could really hide when technology got inconvenient. 73 competitors had registered, representing 42 different species and every major military tradition in the Federation. The Drevathi brought 6 ships, not because they needed backup for Yelthrax, but because turning up with fewer than 6 would seem insufficiently confident. The HFY Collective sent their Whisper-class corvettes, which used biological neural networks to predict sensor sweeps before they happened. The Forge clans contributed ships built from crystalline matrices that could refract scanning beams. Even the Bentheri, whose military philosophy generally emphasized aggressive visible presence, had sent a stealth frigate just to prove they could build one if they wanted. And then there was Anya's ship. The Nightingale looked like someone had taken a standard Earth corvette, stripped off everything decorative, and rebuilt it according to principles that made engineers uncomfortable. No elegant curves, no exotic materials that cost more than planetary GDP, just angular surfaces covered in what appeared to be carefully calculated patches of different coatings. One Forge Clan technician described it as aggressively boring to look at. "That's a ship," Yelthrax had observed during the opening ceremonies, his voice carrying across the diplomatic reception with calculated volume. "I assumed it was a cargo hauler someone forgot to remove from the competition space." Polite laughter rippled through the assembled delegation. Even species that didn't particularly like the Drevathi had to admit the human vessel lacked aesthetic ambition. Anya, present at the reception in her formal uniform, had smiled slightly, not the diplomatic smile from her photo. Something else, something that didn't quite reach her eyes but suggested she'd heard funnier jokes before and hadn't laughed at those either. "It gets me places," she'd responded, her accent marking her as coming from Earth's northern territory. Then she'd taken a drink from her glass and moved to a different conversation cluster before anyone could follow up. The tournament director, a Hirathi administrator named Velkis, who'd been running this competition for 30 cycles, went through the formalities. Rules were simple enough. The obsidian reaches would be divided into sectors, competitors would hide. Hunter drones, operating on standardized sensor packages, would seek. Last ship undetected won each round. Rounds would eliminate competitors until only finalists remained. Those finalists would then face each other directly in elimination brackets. Hiding from drones, Yelthrax had mentioned to a cluster of Drevathi supporters, is merely preliminary exercise. The real challenge begins when you must hide from opponents who more knowing ripples of agreement. Everyone understood the early rounds existed mostly to weed out amateurs who'd gotten lucky in qualifying. When Velkis read out the competition brackets, Anya drew a preliminary sector that included 2 Drevathi ships, a Hirathi neural networked corvette, and something called a phase dancer from the Ethereum Concordat, that allegedly existed in 4 dimensions simultaneous. The unofficial commentary feeds gave her 20 minutes before elimination. As ships moved into position for the first round, with 60 hours on the countdown until hunter drones deployed, Yelthrax performed the traditional Drevathi pre-hunt meditation. It involved achieving perfect stillness of thought, aligning one's consciousness with the void, and visualizing your prey's inevitable defeat. He visualized the human ship quite clearly, pictured it trying desperately to hide its obvious thermal signature, imagined its pilot's growing panic as drone sensors closed in, allowed himself a moment of satisfaction at how this would reinforce proper galactic hierarchy. Somewhere in the obsidian reaches, Commander Anya Petrov shut down every unnecessary system on the Nightingale, adjusted her ship's position to a carefully calculated spot, relative to 3 overlapping asteroids, and settled in with a book and a container of coffee. The countdown began. Nobody, including the tournament's most sophisticated monitoring systems, saw her smile. The thing about advanced sensor technology, which the galaxy had spent approximately 12,000 cycles perfecting, was that it made everyone involved extremely confident about what they were looking for. Heat signatures, gravitational distortions, electromagnetic emissions, mass displacement, energy output, communication leakage, even exotic particles that most species couldn't pronounce but knew indicated something with a power core is trying very hard to pretend it isn't here. The hunter drones deployed across the obsidian reaches with mathematical precision, their sensor nets overlapping in patterns that theoretically left 0 gaps. These weren't simple machines. Each drone incorporated AIs sophisticated enough to adapt search algorithms in real time, cross-reference anomalies, and distinguish between interesting rock and ship pretending to be interesting rock. They were, according to Velkis during the opening broadcast, the most advanced seeker systems ever deployed in tournament history, which made the first elimination genuinely surprising. 18 minutes into the round, a Ben-Theory stealth frigate lit up on every screen like someone had set fire to a spotlight factory. The ship had been using a fairly standard cloaking approach, dampening emissions, while hiding in the sensor shadow of a large metallic asteroid. Perfectly reasonable tactics. The kind of thing that should have lasted at least a few hours. The hunter drones found it anyway. Unfortunate, the Ben Theory captain admitted over the official elimination channel, sounding more confused than embarrassed. Our systems indicated no detection risk. Analysis suggests the drones employed a novel scanning frequency we hadn't accounted for. By the 4-hour mark, 17 ships had been eliminated. The phase dancer from the Ethereum Concordat, which had indeed been existing in 4 dimensions, very cleverly got tagged when hunter drones started scanning for exotic dimensional bleed. A Forge Clan crystalline ship that could refract sensor beams discovered the drones had simply started using more sensor beams than anything could refract simultaneously. The Hyrathi neural network corvette that could predict sensor sweeps got caught by drones that randomized their patterns faster than biological prediction could adapt. Advanced technology, it turned out, had predictable failure modes when you understood how advanced technology worked. The Dravathi ships remained undetected. Obviously, their stealth systems didn't just hide signatures, they convinced sensors that empty space was emptier than it should be. Philosophical invisibility through technological enlightenment. Yelthrax's personal vessel, the Absolute Void, was generating a pocket of space-time that made hunter drones experience something their programmers described as existential uncertainty about whether they should even be scanning that region. Extremely impressive, worth every credit of the Empire's substantial defense budget. Also still hidden, the Nightingale. Telemetry confirms the human vessel remains undetected. Velkis announced at the 6-hour update, his translator rendering his tone as professionally neutral with undertones of confusion. The betting pools adjusted slightly, 80-47-1 became 80-20-1, not because anyone thought humanity had suddenly developed competent stealth technology, but because sometimes dumb luck lasted longer than statistics suggested it should. At the 12-hour mark, 31 ships were gone. The survivors represented the absolute elite of galactic stealth operations, ships that cost more than Earth's entire annual military budget, crews trained from hatching in the arts of tactical invisibility, technologies that bent laws of physics into uncomfortable position, and one human corvette that shouldn't have lasted 12 minutes, let alone 12 hours. Perhaps one Grelian commentator suggested during the broadcast, "The human is employing some novel approach we haven't considered." Like what? Her co-commentator responded. Humans have been observed extensively. Their stealth technology is decades behind current standards, unless Commander Anya has invented entirely new physics in the last standard month. She's simply lucky. Yelthrax, monitoring the competition from within his ship's meditation chamber, allowed himself a flicker of irritation, not because the human remained undetected. Random chance sometimes favored the incompetent, but because her continued presence was becoming a distraction from proper competitors. Other species were starting to whisper, to question, to wonder if perhaps humanity had capabilities they'd hidden. Ridiculous, obviously, but image mattered in competitions like that. He adjusted his vessel's position deeper into a sensor null void, and prepared for the long game. The tournament would run for days. Eventually the human would make a mistake. They always did. At hour 18, something interesting happened. A Dravathi ship, not Yelthrax's but one of the other 5, got tagged. The pilot, a decorated veteran named Thexus the Imperceptible, expressed genuine shock over the elimination channel. Impossible. My systems showed no drone proximity, no scanning activity, no detection indicators whatsoever. Perhaps your systems malfunctioned. Velkis suggested diplomatically. Dravathi systems do not malfunction, Thexus responded, his translator crackling with indignation. They are tested to 17 redundant standards. Something else occurred, but analysis of the drone logs showed standard protocol. The hunter AI had simply found him. No exotic methods, just normal scanning that somehow succeeded where it shouldn't have. By hour 24, 2 more Dravathi vessels had been eliminated under similarly mysterious circumstances. Both pilots insisted their stealth remained perfect. Both times drones found them anyway, almost as if something had encouraged the drones to look in exactly the right place at exactly the right time. The Nightingale remained undetected. This is highly irregular, one of the eliminated Dravathi captains announced during the official debriefing. I propose reviewing the human sensor logs. There may be unauthorized scanning activity. Velkis, who'd seen approximately every form of cheating attempted over 30 cycles of tournament administration,
authorized the review. The Nightingale's systems were examined by 3 independent technical teams. They found nothing. No active sensors, no scanning beam, no communication with drones. The ship was, according to all technical measures, sitting completely dormant in space, low power mode, minimal systems active, not even enough energy output to heat a cup of that coffee humans were obsessed with. Then how? The Dravathi captain demanded. Is she avoiding detection while our vessels fail? Nobody had an answer that didn't sound ridiculous. At hour 36, the preliminary round ended. 12 ships remained undetected. 7 Dravathi, including Yelthrax, 2 Hierathi, 1 Forge Clan crystalline vessel, 1 Ethereum Concordat ship that had learned to exist in 5 dimensions out of spite, and the Nightingale. The betting pools went into chaos. Not because bookmakers thought Anya could win, but because she'd clearly gotten lucky enough that maybe, possibly, through some statistical miracle, luck might continue. The second preliminary round began immediately. New sector, new drone patterns, 48 hours on the clock. This time, the Dravathi ships adjusted tactics. If something was interfering with standard stealth protocols, they'd employ advanced methods. Yelthrax personally recalibrated his vessel's void generation systems to maximum sensitivity. The remaining Dravathi captains coordinated their positions to create overlapping zones of sensor confusion. They were taking this seriously now, not because they feared the human obviously, but because proper form demanded excellence even when facing inferior opponents. Hour 6 of the second round, 3 ships eliminated, none of them Dravathi. Hour 12, 2 more gone. The Ethereum Concordat vessel discovered that existing in 5 dimensions just meant drones could find you in 5 dimensions. Hour 18, another Dravathi ship tagged. The pilot's elimination message consisted of several words that the translators refused to render, followed by a formal request to physically inspect the human vessel for illegal modifications. Velkis authorized another inspection, another technical team, another thorough examination. The Nightingale's systems remained boringly normal. Human standard components, no exotic technology, no hidden sensors. The most sophisticated piece of equipment on board appeared to be Anya's coffee maker, which she'd apparently upgraded with aftermarket parts. Perhaps, Velkis suggested carefully, when the Dravathi demanded explanation, Commander Anya is simply skilled. The Dravathi representative's throat sac flickered through colors that didn't require translation. Hour 32, more Dravathi ships eliminated. Hour 42, another gone. By the end of the second preliminary round only 5 ships remained. Yelthrax obviously, 1 other Dravathi vessel piloted by Hexara the Untraceable, who had a reputation for paranoid perfectionism that made her nearly impossible to find. The Forge Clan crystalline ship, whose pilot had apparently decided to hide inside a particularly dense asteroid by physically merging with it. A Hierathi corvette, whose neural network had achieved something the pilot described as transcendent prediction through acceptance of uncertainty. And the Nightingale, which continued to simply not be detected. The final preliminary round would determine which 4 ships advanced to direct elimination brackets. 72 hours, maximum difficulty. Hunter drones with adaptive AI that learned from previous. As ships moved into position, Yelthrax performed another meditation. This time, his visualization of victory felt less certain. Not because he doubted his abilities, doubt was for species without 3 consecutive champions, but because the humans' continued survival had stopped feeling like luck and started feeling like something else. Something he didn't have vocabulary for yet. Commander Anya, settling into her carefully calculated position, relative to a cluster of overlapping sensor shadows, checked her coffee supply and opened her book to the marked page. She'd brought several books. This was going to take a while.
The thing nobody seemed to be asking, which was frankly the only interesting question in the entire tournament, was what Commander Anya Petrov was actually doing for 72 consecutive hours, while sitting in a spaceship with minimal life support and no entertainment systems beyond books she'd brought from Earth. The answer would have disappointed anyone expecting exotic training montages or advanced human intuition. She was being phenomenally, astronomically bored, on purpose. This was, it turned out, a skill. Back on Earth, during her naval intelligence training, Anya had spent 6 months learning submarine warfare doctrine from instructors who'd perfected the art of sitting quietly in metal tubes under several thousand meters of ocean while hostile forces searched overhead. The primary lesson hadn't been about technology or tactics. It had been about something the instructors called aggressive patience. The enemy, her training commander had explained while they sat in a simulator running a 70-hour silent running exercise, will get bored before you do, guaranteed. Because they're looking for you, which means they're doing something. You're just existing, which means you're doing nothing. Doing nothing is easier than doing something. Humans are persistence predators. We evolved to walk after prey until it died of exhaustion. You think our ancestors got bored during 20-hour hunts? They got bored and kept walking anyway. The galaxy's stealth doctrine, Anya had realized after studying tournament archives for 8 months, was entirely built around technology solving problems. Better sensors, better cloaking, better countermeasures. An arms race of increasingly sophisticated equipment designed to hide sophisticated equipment. Nobody had considered the alternative just be boring. The Nightingale wasn't invisible. It was uninterested. Every surface coating, every system configuration, every positioning choice was calculated to make her ship read as background noise. Not nothing here, but definitely a rock, probably ice, maybe some metal. Scan the next grid square instead. Drones searched for anomalies. Anya didn't provide anomalies. She provided exactly what sensors expected to find in asteroid fields. Thermal variance consistent with solar radiation patterns, mass readings that matched debris distribution, electromagnetic silence that looked like electromagnetic silence instead of electromagnetic silence that's working very hard to seem natural. But the real trick, the part that made everything work, was understanding how hunters thought. The Dravathi, for instance, had been using the same basic stealth philosophy for generations. Hide in the most difficult places, generate sensor confusion, trust that superior technology would defeat inferior detection. Proud doctrine, traditional doctrine, completely predictable doctrine, which meant Anya knew exactly where they'd hide and exactly when they'd reposition. Around hour 40 of the first preliminary round, she'd noticed a Dravathi vessel's energy signature flickering near grid sector 7th, not because she was scanning active sensors would give her away immediately, but because the drone's search pattern had briefly intensified in that region before moving on, which meant they'd detected something interesting but not quite interesting enough to investigate. 10 hours later, when those same drones passed through 7 Theta again on their randomized patrol, Anya had fired her maneuvering thrusters for exactly 2 seconds, not toward anything, not away from anything, just enough to create a tiny thermal bloom that would dissipate in 7 minutes, but would for those 7 minutes register as possibly something on the edge of drone sensor. The drones, operating on sophisticated AI that prioritized investigating marginal contacts, had shifted their search pattern toward the thermal signature, which brought them through 7 Theta for the 3rd time in 12 hours, where they'd found the Dravathi ship that had been hiding there, because even perfect stealth stopped working when hunter drones made 4 consecutive passes with overlapping sensor coverage. Anya hadn't fired on anyone, hadn't hacked anything, hadn't broken a single tournament rule. She'd just made drones look in places where looking would be productive. The second Dravathi elimination had been even simpler. Their vessels always maintained minimum safe distance from large asteroids to avoid gravitational complications with their void generation systems. It was in their tactical doctrine, which was in their military academy textbooks, which Earth intelligence had acquired 8 months ago through entirely legal purchases from Dravathi-used bookstores. So Anya had positioned herself near a large asteroid, waited for a Dravathi ship to maintain minimum safe distance on the opposite side, and then waited for drone patterns to sweep through. When drones found nothing near the asteroid, they'd flag the region as searched and move on, unless something encouraged them to search more thoroughly. Another 2-second thruster burn, another marginal contact, another incentive for drones to double-check. Hexera, the untraceable, still competing in the current round, was more challenging. Her reputation for paranoid perfectionism meant she didn't follow standard doctrine. She repositioned constantly, never stayed in one hiding configuration for more than 6 hours, and apparently triple-checked every decision through some kind of meditation practice. But paranoid perfectionism had patterns too. When you moved every 6 hours, you moved every 6 hours. When you triple-checked decisions, You took predictable amounts of time. When you were so concerned about being unpredictable that you randomized everything, you created a pattern of randomization that was itself predictable. Anya had been tracking Hexera's repositioning timing for 30 hours now. The Dravathi pilot moved in a 6-hour cycle with variance of plus or minus 40 minutes, always to positions that maximized distance from previous locations, always to regions with optimal sensor confusion, which meant in approximately 2 hours, Hexera would move again. And Anya knew 3 possible positions that fit her doctrine, and she knew which one Hexera would probably choose because it offered the most sensor null characteristic, and she knew exactly when to fire her thrusters to make drones very interested in that region right after Hexera finished repositioning. The galaxy had spent thousands of cycles perfecting technology. Humanity had spent 300,000 cycles learning to predict where the antelope would be in 6 hours based on which way it was looking at grass. Commander Anya checked her chrono, finished another chapter, poured another cup of coffee from her modified make, and waited, with the patience of ancestors who'd once walked after prey for 20 hours straight because walking was easier than giving up. The championship round came down to exactly what everyone had predicted, plus one element nobody had predicted, which was rapidly becoming the story's dominant theme. Yelthrax the Unperceived versus Commander Anya Petra. Hexera the Untraceable had been eliminated in hour 68 of the final preliminary round after drones had, through what she insisted was statistically impossible coincidence, searched her repositioning zone with unusual thoroughness. The Forge clan crystalline ship had been found when its pilot made the fatal mistake of merging too deeply with an asteroid, and couldn't separate fast enough when drones arrived. The Hyrathi neural network had achieved transcendent prediction right up until it predicted drones wouldn't check a certain sector, and the drones, not being philosophically inclined, had checked it anyway, which left the inevitable final confrontation. The 3-time champion representing 12,000 cycles of Dravathi stealth supremacy, and the human who'd somehow survived every preliminary round through what the galaxy was now desperately hoping was just extremely prolonged luck. The betting pools had Earth at 8, not because bookmakers believed but because enough people were putting money on the entertaining outcome that odds had to adjust toward financial survival. Finally, Yelthrax announced during the pre-championship ceremony, his throat sac displaying colors that translated as relief mixed with predatory anticipation, "We face each other directly. No more hiding from drones, no more uncertainty about random chance, just hunter against prey, as competition was meant to be." Anya, standing in her formal uniform at the opposite end of the ceremonial platform, nodded politely. "Should be interest. You have performed adequately against automated systems," Yelthrax continued, because Dravathi champions didn't do brief statements when elaborate pronouncements were available. "But drones follow algorithms. I follow instinct honed across decades. I have studied your species. I know how humans think, how you react under pressure, how you make decisions when frightened." "That's nice," Anya responded, her expression suggesting she was mentally reviewing her coffee inventory rather than engaging with psychological warfare. The championship format was elegantly simple: 1 hunter, 1 prey, roles assigned by coin toss. The hunter would have access to their ship's full sensor suite and weapon systems set to tagging mode. The prey would hide. Detection meant elimination. Then roles would reverse. Best of 3 rounds. The coin toss, conducted by Velkis with ceremonial gravity, gave Yelthrax first hunter role, which meant Anya had to hide while being actively pursued by the most decorated stealth operative in galactic history, who would be using sensors considerably more sophisticated than drone AI, who knew every trick that had kept her alive through preliminary. The galaxy tuned in to watch what everyone assumed would be a masterclass in Dravathi's superiority, followed by a polite human concession speech. Anya piloted the Nightingale to the designated competition zone, a particularly dense region of the Obsidian Reaches, where asteroids clustered like thoughts around a bad decision. She had 30 minutes to position herself before Yelthrax began pursuit. She spent 28 of those minutes sitting completely still, ship systems in minimal mode, reading another chapter of her book. Then, with 2 minutes remaining, she fired her maneuvering thrusters and moved the Nightingale to a position that any first-year tactical student could identify as terrible: high exposure to 3 different approach vectors, minimal cover from sensor not even particularly good asteroid shadows to hide in. And then she shut down every single system except life support and passive sensors. Yelthrax began his hunt with the confidence of someone who'd done this hundreds of times across dozens of training exercises,
and 3 championship tournaments. His sensor suite, vastly superior to drone equipment, could detect thermal variations across millions of cubic kilometers, pick up gravitational micro-displacements from ship mass, even identify the specific electromagnetic signature of human reactor design. He swept the competition zone methodically, eliminated grid sectors with mathematical precision, cross-referenced anomalies against expected background readings. His AI assisted, but Yelthrax made the decisions, because technology served the hunter rather than replacing the hunter's judgment. 6 hours into the round, he'd eliminated 70% of possible hiding locations. 12 hours in, 90%. At hour 16, his sensors registered something interesting, a thermal pattern that didn't quite match ambient radiation distribution. Not much, barely worth investigate, but Yelthrax hadn't won 3 championships by ignoring marginal contacts. He adjusted his approach vector and swept the region more thoroughly, found nothing. Interesting, false positive, perhaps, or the human had been there and moved. He expanded the search pattern, checking adjacent sectors for repositioning signatures. Still nothing. More interesting. Perhaps the human was better at this than preliminary rounds suggested. Perhaps she'd been hiding capabilities, waiting for the championship to deploy advanced technique. Yelthrax felt something he hadn't experienced in competitions for years. Uncertainty, not fear. Dravathi champions didn't fear, but genuine question about what his opponent might do next. He recalibrated his sensors, swept the region again, checked thermal, gravitational, electromagnetic exotic particle readings. Nothing, nothing, nothing. 20 hours into the round, Yelthrax realized he'd spent 4 hours searching the same general region, because he kept detecting marginal contacts that vanished upon investigation. His AI suggested this indicated sensor malfunction. Yelthrax knew his sensors didn't malfunction, which meant something else was happening. At hour 24, a thought occurred to him that would have seemed absurd before this tournament. What if the human wasn't hiding from his sensors at all? What if she was just sitting somewhere obvious, doing absolutely nothing, generating so little activity that she read as background? He recalibrated his entire search philosophy, stopped looking for anomalies, started looking for things that seemed too normal, grid sectors that registered as completely empty, positions that matched background readings perfectly. Hour 30, found 3 candidates. Hour 32, investigated first candidate. Nothing. Hour 34, second candidate. Nothing. Hour 35, approached third candidate. Sensors at maximum sensitivity. Every system primed to the Nightingale was sitting in plain sight between 2 asteroids. Systems dark, not even attempting to hide beyond simple, "I'm not doing anything interesting" energy level. Yelthrax's tagging systems locked on. Victory registered on all official channels. Round 1 to Yelthrax the Unperceived. Velkis announced. 36 hours 12 minutes. Championship record for longest successful pursuit. The galaxy exhaled. Order had been restored. The human had performed respectably, but ultimately fallen to superior skill. Roles reversed. Enya became the hunter. Yelthrax would hide. This, everyone agreed, would be brief. Yelthrax's vessel could generate sensor null voids, could convince instruments that space-time itself was uncertain about local coordinates. The human would search for days and find nothing. 30-minute positioning period began. Yelthrax piloted the absolute void to a location he'd prepared conceptually during the previous round, deep in overlapping sensor shadows, positioned where 3 asteroid masses created gravitational confusion. He activated his full stealth suite, engaged void generation at maximum output, became effectively a location where reality politely declined to provide information. Enya began her hunt. She activated her sensors, standard human equipment, nothing exotic, and performed one complete sweep of the competition zone. Took approximately 40 minutes. Her AI flagged 16 anomalies worth investigating. She investigated none of them. Instead, she positioned the Nightingale in the exact geometric center of the competition zone, and stopped moving. Just stopped. Hour 2, no activity. Hour 6, still no activity. Hour 12, Enya had apparently decided to read another book while her passive sensors monitored background radiation patterns. Yelthrax, hidden in his perfect void, watching his own sensors track the human's inexplicable inactivity, felt something he absolutely refused to categorize as nervousness. She was doing nothing, not searching, not repositioning, not even performing systematic grid elimination, just sitting there, waiting. Hour 18. The Absolute Void's void generation systems, designed to run continuously for weeks, operated flawlessly. Yelthrax's position remained undetectable by any conventional sensor methodology, but void generation required power, and power generation created heat, and heat had to dissipate somewhere, even if the dissipation was spread across such subtle gradients that only the most sensitive long-term monitoring could detect cumulative patterns. Anya's sensors had been recording background radiation for 18 hours. Hour 24. Yelthrax realized the human wasn't hunting. She was waiting for him to leave evidence of existence through simple thermodynamics. He could maintain void generation indefinitely, but the longer he maintained it, the more certain the cumulative data would indicate something is preventing heat from behaving normally in this region. He had two choices: stay hidden, and eventually be found through patient observation, or reposition, which would create detectable movement signatures. Hour 30. Yelthrax made a decision that violated every instinct developed across his entire career. He would reposition aggressively, using maximum stealth during movement, and establish a new hiding location. Before the human sensors could track the transition, he moved. Anya's sensors registered a gravitational micro-displacement as the absolute void shifted mass from one location to another. Not much, barely worth flagging, but her AI had been programmed to watch for exactly that specific signature in exactly the region where thermodynamic data suggested something was preventing normal heat dissipation. Tagging lock achieved. Round 2 to Commander Anya Petrov, Velkis announced, his translator failing to hide genuine surprise. 30 hours, 42 minutes. The championship stood at 1 round each. Final round. Yelthrax would hunt first. This time, nobody in the galaxy knew what to expect. The positioning period began again. Anya moved the Nightingale to another terrible position, even more exposed than before, sitting in a region where sensor sweeps could reach from 5 different vectors. And wait, Yelthrax began his hunt with every sophisticated technique available to Dravathi tactical doctrine. He would not underestimate, would not assume, would not allow the human's apparent simplicity to distract from methodical elimination of possibility. Hour 8. He'd eliminated 50% of potential hiding locations with mathematical certainty. Hour 12. 75%. Hour 14. His sensors registered another marginal thermal contact in a region he'd already cleared. This time, Yelthrax ignored it. Obvious bait. The human was trying to manipulate his search pattern. He continued systematic elimination. Hour 16. Another marginal contact, different region. Ignored. Hour 18. Third contact. Also ignored. Hour 20. Yelthrax realized he'd been so focused on not being manipulated that he'd failed to investigate 3 legitimate anomalies, one of which was probably the actual human position. He circled back to investigate. All 3 regions. Nothing. Hour 24. 4 more marginal contacts. Hour 26. Yelthrax's thought processes, normally flowing with philosophical certainty, had degraded into something his training had never prepared him for. Second-guessing basic perception. Was she really in the terrible position his sensors kept suggesting? Or was that too obvious? But what if obvious was the strategy? But what if obvious's strategy was itself too obvious? But hour 30. Yelthrax found the Nightingale sitting exactly where his sensors had suggested 8 different times, which he'd dismissed as impossible because nobody would hide somewhere that visible, except someone who understood that visibility was subjective and patience was objective. Final round to Commander Anya Petrov, championship victory. 30 hours, 17 minutes. The galaxy experienced what could politely be termed collective cognitive adjustment. Yelthrax, exiting his vessel for the award ceremony, looked at the human woman who defeated him and asked the question that had been growing for days. What technique did you use? What technology? What secret? Anya considered this while accepting her trophy from Velkis, who seemed personally offended that his record-keeping systems had to accommodate human victory. I sat still, and waited for you to think too hard, she said finally. Turns out that works pretty well. That's not a technique, Yelthrax protested. That's just boring. Anya suggested. Yes, exactly. The Federation of Aligned Worlds had opinions about humanity, and precisely none of them had involved the word patient. They were adjusting those opinions now. rapidly, with growing concern about what other capabilities humans might possess if they simply decided to shut up and sit still for extended periods. Anya accepted congratulations from various delegations, declined all interview requests and returned to her ship. She had a report to file with Earth Naval Intelligence, something about how the galaxy's most sophisticated stealth doctrine had a consistent weakness. It assumed hunting required doing something clever. Sometimes the cleverest thing was doing nothing at all, and humans, it turned out, could do nothing with truly alarming competence when properly motivated. The Nightingale departed the Obsidian reaches without fanfare, without external lights, without broadcast signals. Somewhere in Earth's naval planning offices, strategists were already writing new doctrine. Somewhere in the Dravathi Empire, military academies were convening emergency sessions to discuss how silence could be weaponized through simple refusal to be interesting. And somewhere in Federation space, bookmakers were calculating how much they'd lost by underestimating species that evolved to walk after prey until physics itself got tired and gave up. The galaxy had learned something important. Humans weren't just loud, they could be quiet, and somehow that was infinitely more terrifying.